All right, Section 12, Governor. PGR, Governor. Description, operation, maintenance, governor, removal of the governor, installation, governor, compensation, engine speed control, engine shutdown, air pressure sensor, assembly, fuel filter, setting, rebalancer, rock arm, stop screw, load regulator, pilot valve associated with linkage, overriding solenoid, oil pressure, shutdown, oil filter, flushing, governor, oil supply, governor storage, governor drive assembly, service data, setting and adjustment table specification and listings, equipment listings, material specification, master material specifications. Electric Motor Division GM Engine Maintenance Manual 12, Section 12 Governor 8, 12, and 16 and 20 cylinders. The limiting replacing of the PGR Governor is the turbocharged engine for the electro-hydraulic speed control to maintain the engine speed because it's selected for the engine operated with the governor to provide with the sensor assembly sensitive to the absolute with the air pressure which operates to adjust the engine load in proportion with the air supply with the range of the load regulated to ensure the correct airflow ratio. Additional rocker arm and lever arrangement is provided with the governor to stop upward movement of the power piston through the action of the fuel limiter. The governor incorporates engine protective of the service device of figure 12.2 with the stress valve on the engine down with the actuated low engine pressure with a high oil temperature, or as a result of the operation of low water crankcase pressure detector, a visual indication of an alarm actuated with the event of the engine protection shutdown. Normal engine shutdown is obtained with the actuating one of the speed solenoids within the stop button. One auxiliary device which are part of the governor include the load regulator pilot with the valve which controls the oil to load regulator with the ORS and the solenoid which energizes raises the load regulator pilot valve to the minimum field position. Alright, one shot backing out of this. Oil filter 1, 1 oil filter, 2 air box connection, 3 pilot valve engine oil supply, 4 pilot valve oil drainage, 5 terminal shah scale, 6 compensation needle valve, 7 vane motor oil line connection, increase excitation, 8 oil level sight glass, 9 vane motor oil line connection, decrease excitation, 10 lowering pressure shutdown plunger, 11 electrical receptacle, 12 engine pressure connection, 13 time delay accumulator, 14 balancing servo oil filter, 15 vent plug, 18 oil drain cod, 17 terminal shaft control. Alright, figure 12.2, the governor schematic diagram. 1, the oil pressure shutdown, 2, speed control solenoids, 3, speed scale, 4, shutdown rod, 5, air pressure sensor assembly, 6, fuel limit lever, 7, the rebalancing rocker arm, 8, overriding solenoid, 9, pilot valve scale, 10, power piston tail rod, 11, pilot valve linkage eccentric, 12, piston stop screw, 13 load regulator pilot valve, 14 compensation needle valve, 15 power piston, 16 terminal shaft scale, 17 buffer piston, 18 governor oil pressure accumulator, 19 regulating port, 20 power piston pilot plot valve, 21 compensation receiving piston, 22 ball head assembly, 23 speeder springs, 24 speeding set pistons, 25 speeding control pilot valves, 26 speeding control rotating bushing. The main parts of the speed fuel control portion of the governor are speed sensing arrangement, speed slurring of the flyweights, fuel adjusting control with the power piston, with the compensating with the mechanism, compensating with the land integral on the power piston, pilot valve, and the buffering piston in the springs. Independent oil system, oil sump, and oil pump, the accumulator's external filter and connection passage. If the governor has a self-contained hydraulic oil system consisting of the storage sub and the rotary gear pump, the accumulator's oil lubricating the move of the parts provided with the forces necessary to operate the various parts of the governor, the various speed with the engine, with the throttle change, with the maintain, with the constant engine, with the speed, with the load, with the change of the amount of fuel injected with the cylinder may be varied with the determined with the position of the power piston, move with the power piston, side with the speed ring varied with the throttle and change with the engine speed, change with the load, with the change with the flyweight will move with the change of the position of the plunger, controls the supply of oil pump or power position. The power position move with the injector control rack through the governor rotary shaft and injector linkage. The upward motion of the power piston result from the under pressure control with the power piston pilot valve plunger raising the position against the pressure and oil of the power piston spring. The compensating mechanism prevents the engine from racing, hunting, or the arresting of the movement of the power piston after it has been trailed amount with sufficient to give it the desired speed. The compensating mechanism includes the integral receiving compensation piston, buffer springs, and compensation needle valve. The governor's drive geogaff the pumps and the rotating the bushing of the flyweights to rotate together. The accumulators provide with storage of the governor oil pressure under and maximum pressure of governor oil regulated by the bypass of one accumulated buffer's piston center, but the spring is located between the pilot valve plunger and the power piston. The piston is bypassed by the needle valve, and also passages which are uncovered will be removed within a certain distance, but away from the central position. The small difference in the oil pressure for the two sides of the buffering position transmitted with the receiving the compensation piston and the pilot valve plunger. Operation figure 12.3 illustrates the operation of the fuel control portion of the governor with the power piston springs act with the shut off the fuel of the engine. The oil under the pressure is used only to raise the power piston and increase the supply of the engine, but the following paragraphs describe the sequence of events of the different operational conditions. Load decrease and throttle decrease. It's shown in figure 12.3 with the engine running normally under steady load with the constant speed. The flywheel pilot valve plunger of the buffer pistons at the normal position. The control arm of the pilot valve of the plunger control the regulating porthole of the rotating bushing. The power piston is stationary. Assume the engine load is decreased with the increase with the speed increase with the flyweights moved out with the raising with the control lane with the pilot valve plunger, uncover the regulating parts with the rotating bushing, uncover the regulating ports with the direct permanent oil to escape the area with the right over the buffer with the position with the move of the right as the spring pressure forward with the power piston down. It is apparent that since the compression of the right hand buffer the spring the oil pressure of the left hand buffer piston is a little higher than the one on the right. The pressure on it is connected to the areas above and below the receiving the compensation piston on the pilot valve. Alright, figure 12, figure 12.3 shows the, bottom shows the oil sump, the drive shaft of the engine terminal shaft scale with the increase with the fuel, decrease with the buffer, spring, buffer, piston, regulating point, compensating needle, power piston, spring, gear pump, drive shaft, control and piston valve, rotating bushing, ball head, flyweight, pilot valve, plunger, spring loaded accumulators, piston, valve, piston, integral point with the pilot, plunger, receiving compensation piston, speeder spring, oil bypass to the main containing constant pressure, speed setting piston, shutdown bushing lock nut, shutdown bushing, gap of the 132 inch gap at the idle, fuel limit nut and fuel limit lock nut. Alright, the plunger instance for the high pressure is above the force downward, so that the land of the pilot valve plunger still starts to close with the top of the power with the piston move, but the governor properly adjusts with the action with the top of the movement power piston when the move far enough to correct with the load of the change of the start action. The oil leaking of the compensated needle valve of the buffer piston is being returned to the center, which gradually releases the force of the top of the receiving compensation piston. The force is no longer needed to hold the pilot valve plunger in its central position because during the time of the engine speed has been returning the normally outward force of the flywheel has been reduced until the balance of the speed or springs. It's apparent that the compensating mechanism described above the procedure stable operation permitting the governor to move rapidly in response to the speed change, then wait for the speed to return to the normal. The load increase of the throttle. Load increase or throttle increased. As before, all the part of the governor's incentive, there is no power piston movement. Assume that the engine load is increased, result of the decrease in the speed of the governor will then go through the cycle operation with its valves. The decrease in speed will cause the flyweights to move inward, which lowers the pilot valve plunger, opening the port. The oil from the accumulators pass the pilot valve with the force of the buffer piston to the left, move the power piston upward to give the engine fuel, more fuel. The compression of the left-hand buffer spring is a result of the higher pressure on the right-hand side of the buffer plunger on the underside of the receiving the compensation piston. The pressure moves the pilot valve plunger upward and stops the movement of the power piston when it is moved far enough to correct the load of the change of the start of the action. Oil leaking through the compensated needle valve gradually release of the force under the receiving the compensation piston, allowing the buffer piston to return to the center of this force no longer needed to hold the pilot valve plunger in central position, but because during this time the engine speed has been returned to the normal operation speed, and proceeding with the description of the operation speed change result of the load change and it has been considered. Similar governor movements have occurred with the difference between the actual governor and speed, with the governor speed setting of the producer for the changing with the speed spring with the tension or through the speed adjusting control. You with the governor with large speed chain with the buffer piston travel as much greater by the left and the right depending on the oil on increase the decrease in speed, opening the passage for the flow of the oil. Full flow of oil or from the power piston. Under normal operation air pressure sensors assembly rebalancing arrangement will automatically adjust itself to provide correct operation. However, if the airbox in the fuel demand is not normal during operation, the rebalancing with the fuel limit arrangement is explained with the following pages. Will automatically make an adjustment to compensate for the condition. Maintenance governor removal. The removal of the governor from the engine is valve to open the drain cack on the side of the governor and drain oil to the suitable container. Remove the right and left main control rods from the governor of the control rod lever. 3. Disconnect the electrical connector to all external lines and the hoses. Remove the 4 stud nuts securing the governor to the mounting with the surface to lift the governor off the studs. Remove the gasket from between the governor and the mounting surface. Use the careful handling of the governor. Avoid striking the end of the drive shaft of the terminal shaft. The damage can be done to the shaft of the bearings and governor oil pumps gears. 5. Remove the governor to the control rod for the governor terminal shaft. The governor insulation. Install the governor on the engine itself. Apply the governor to the control rod lever into the governor terminal shaft. Caution: ensure the unsplined area of the lever of the inside diameter properly aligned to the key wave of the missing spline of the terminal shaft. Install the gaskets on the governor mounting surface. 3. Install the governor on the mounting surface with the terminal shaft pointing toward the engine. 4. Apply 4 stud nuts in the torque specified value. 5. Connect electrical connector to all external line hoses. 6. Connect the right and left bank control rods for the governor control rod lever. Every time the governor is installed on the engine, the injector rack setting should be checked for the manufacturer tolerance of the governor mounting bolts for the position of the governor in relating to the injector linkage that can change with the rack setting. Governor compensation description. Compensating mechanisms prevent the engine from the racing with the hunting, the resting of the movement of the power piston after the travel with sufficient amount to give the desired speed. But the compensation mechanism includes the integral compensation receiving piston buffer, piston springs, compensating needle valve when the engine started for the first time after the installation. New reconditioned governor of the one over there has been drained or cleaned with the new oil added. The governor will require compensation adjustment with the necessary to purge the governor oil system of the trapped air. Maintenance compensation adjustment. Set the governor oil with a proper level of cycle after operated with the governor at speed. Open the compensating needle valve with figure 12-1 several turns. Loosen the vent plug 12-1 several turns. If you do not remove the plug, the governor will hunt and the surge of the air will bleed from the system at the vent plug. When the oil flows from the vent plug, the system is free of air and compensating needle valve should be closed with the slow of the hunting condition. Stop the lesson. Although the governor run until the normal operation temperature is reached, tighten the vent plug to prevent the oil leakage. Add the oil necessary to obtain the proper level of the governor. 4. After normal temperature has been reached again with the compensating needle valve, allow the governor to hunt, then close the needle valve until hunting stops. The needle valve will be approximately 1/4 to 3 turns, depending on the engine characteristics. Test governor stability annually, changing the speed of the observe the governor recovery. If the governor returns to steady speed, the compensation adjustment is satisfactory. The hunting of the assumed close the compensating needle of the valve and test again. Keep the compensation needle valve open as far as possible to prevent the sluggishness and still maintain every governor operation. After the compensation is made, it should be not requiring another adjustment unless the permanent temperature change affects the velocity of the governor oil. And the speed control description. Speed setting with electric hydraulic governor is accomplished by the steps of the and energizing the different combination of the A, B, C, and D solenoids. Figure in 12.4 shows the solenoid A, B, and C with the plunger bearing triangular fulcrum plate with varying distance from the function set fulcrum point. Triangular plate fulcrum bears the lever on the connected with the speed control pilot valve inside the rotating bushing. The D solenoid plunger bears the rotating bushing through the cap and the bearing. When the increase of the speed and the speed spring must be compressed, the oil or the compression lessened with the decrease of the speed. With the speed setting with the position must be changed to satisfy these conditions. Accomplished by releasing governor oil above the speed setting position. Emission the release of the oil from the front of the speed settings piston controlled by the solenoid through the speed pilot valve rotating bushing. When the solenoid in different combinations, the A, B, and C solenoids are energized, the triangular fulcrum is forced down the distance beyond the solenoid energized. Figure 12.4 shows the speed control schematic diagram. You have your triangular fulcrum plate A, B, C, and D, rotating bushing, regular port, the speed control pilot valve, intermittent oil support, port to some spring gear, oil. Oil is trapped oil, intermittent oil, intermediate oil, accumulators, control land, regulator, governor, driver, oil pump, puffer, piston, compensating needle, pilot valve, needle plunger, power piston, terminal shaft, ball head gear, flyweight, speed spring, speed setting, piston, speed setting, piston extension, shutdown, bushing, firm fuel, lock nut, fuel limit, nut. Or this comes with the speed control pilot valve down with the regulating with the forward rotating the bushing, uncover with the permanent with the governor oil with the under the pressure force speed with the setting with the piston down with the compressed speed or spring with the speedy setting with the piston move downward on linkage rate with the speed with the control pilot valve and 2 again close with the regulating port with the desired position if it has been reached. The compression with the speed or spring forces of the flywheel and allowing the governor pilot valve with the plunger to lower and permit oil to raise with the power piston and increase the fuel of the engine. Unbalanced oil pressure with the compensating landing of the pilot valve plunger closed with the regulating port. When the power piston has been raised enough with the desired speed, when the new engine speed reached the flyweights will return to the balanced position as the speeder ring spring set pressure. When the solenoid in combination A, B, and C with the solenoid is de-energized, the triangular Falcon plate will rise, and the speed control pilot valve will also be moved upward. This pilot valve to raise oil above the speed setting piston drain with the regulator port with the oil sump with the speed setting is raised by a spring with the piston moved up with the connecting with linkage of the speed control pilot valve to move down close with the regulating point with the desired position is reached. Then the speed setting of the setting piston was raised. The speeder during compression is less when the flyweights will move it outward for the under central figure force of the pilot valve plunger. Only oil will be released over the power piston, but it will move downward to decrease the fuel supply engine speed. Energize the D-solenoid combination with the other solenoids and their effect for the engine seat sends for the D-solenoid push down the rotating bushing or lower the regulating port, while only the D-solenoids energize the opening for the regulating port with the rotating bushing something permitting oil above the speed setting of the piston to be relieved the piston, then raised with the piston extension lift the shutdown bushings causing the governor to shut off the engine fuel supply. Neither oil enters the speed control rotating bushing through the intermittent supply port. The port is often such size to allow the speed setting of the piston to move at the full stroke within specified time. Consistent speed increases is controlled under all conditions. The operation time speed that decreases is controlled by a slot on the lower land. Alright, maintenance is recommended the suitable test be shown stand BU for making the engine speed setting. The test stand may have the provisions to energize A and D solenoids simultaneously for setting low idle speeds. When setting the engine speed, the governor solenoid adjusts the provided speeds at the intermediate fuel speed throttle position for the applicable speeds at each of the throttle setting form table. A surface data is the end of the section. In addition, with the other information, the governor nameplate and each of the nameplate has inserts. And figure 12.5 shows the full speed of the engine full load injector bracket at the BALPT for the engine should be given the insert of the governor's set at the different fuel load injector racks length out of the engine speed. The new insert shall be applied with the correct information. Just so the 12.5 show the governor nameplate. And every time the governor is installed in the engine, the injector rack length for the setting that should be checked before the attempting to set speed. The governor should be operated at a heated test standard of the 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, sufficient length of the time to allow the temperature to equalize. Facilitate setting speed with the solenoid adjustment wrench must be used when the tools are provided with the means for holding the solenoid case while making a lock nut stop screws and adjustment. Establish absolute pressure of the below is to give him with the table to B with the adjusted solenoid to obtain the speed given in the table A with the described below. 1. Place the throttle in number 6 position. Bring the speed with the specified RPM. Adjust the fulcrum nut with the figure 12.6 for the end of the linkage, raising the fulcrum nut to increase the speed. It shows the A, B, C, and D of the solenoids, your fulcrum nut, and the speed scale. Move the throttle with the number 8 position. Sets back the speed of the D solenoid stop screw back off the step screw to increase speed. While the throttle in number 4 position. Adjust the B solenoid stop screw to set speed to turn the stop screw in speed. Increase speed. 4 is place the throttle in low idle position. Set the speed of adjusting the C solenoid and the stop screw with the turning of the stop screws inside increase speed. While the throttle in idle position, adjusting A solenoid to speed, turn the screw to increase speed. Check above the setting of the readjust the proper speed for the required. Check the engine speed of all throttle positions. All speeds must be within the table shown in table A. Adjusting speed servo scale as follows. With the governor operating with a low idle speed, loosen the scale locking screw with the locking screw. Locate the scale with the stamped idle market is aligned with the pointer and tighten the locking screws. With the governor idle speed, scribe a line on the scale opposite pointer. With the governor on the throttle 8 position, scribe a line on the scale opposite pointer. Engine shutdown. The engine shutdown can be normally accomplished by the pressing of the top button, the placing of the throttle in the stop position. Either action will be energized with the D solenoid with the figure 12.4 with the action, the press of the speed, control rotating the brush, the support with the bellow. Below the land of the speed with the control pilot valve allowed for the trap of the oil from the governor speed with the spring with the position of the drain, the spring arm with the position of the piston, force of the speed ring with the piston under the piston extension with the contact shutdown of the bushing shutting rod, racing the shutdown with the lift of the power piston with the pilot valve. Oil will then be released from the under the power piston, causing the power piston through the associated linkage to bring the injectors in the no fuel position. Maintenance solenoid adjustment. No additional adjustments required for the governor solenoids, D solenoids, which cover the engine shutdown, adjusting the time and speed of the adjustment. Shutdown adjustments may be moved with the governor test site with the adjustment established for the base of the fuel line limit settings. Operated with the governor at low idle speed. Loosen the shutdown bushing nut, figure 12.7. Adjusting the shutdown bushing of the turning the fuel with the limit nut until there is 132 inch clearance between the bottom of the shutdown bushing and one speeding piston fulcrum assembly. Or there's 3 show the tightening bushing, and 3 tighten the bushing lock nut. On figure 12.7 show the shutting down and adjusting lock nut, shutdown rod, bushing lock nut, fuel limit nut, the shutdown bushing, and the 132 inch gap at the low of the idle. Turn the test stands collector switch off position, loosen the speed settings of the stop screw lock nut, adjust the speed setting piston stop screw with the figure 12/8. Position the speed indicator pointer at the slightly above the stop mark on the speed to the scale. Tighten the stop screw lock nut. Figure 12/8 shows the speed setting on the piston stop screw with the fuel limiting cam locking screw, the speed setting piston stop screw, eccentric locking screw, and eccentric. Alright, air pressure sensor assembly. The purpose of the sensor assembly figure 12.9 with adjust the fuel limiter of the pilot valve rebalancer with the derangement in the corner for the absolute air pressure for the automatic piston positioning of the 2 control with depending upon the engine airbox for the pressure automatic atmospheric pressure. The pressure for the sensor for the force balance with the device consistent with the inlet check valve with the officer sits the back with a resistant restriction of the piston of the cam assembly restoring the spring of the bleed with the valve with the absolute pressure below for the arrangement and hydraulic amplifier. Alright, pressure oil, the entry of the sensor for the inlet, check with the valve with the directed upper side of the sensor piston through the orifice pack with a restriction on the upper underside of the sensor piston with the inlet check valve that prevents the siphoning of the oil from the limiter housing during the shutting down periods. The bleed valve regulates the rate of the oil flow from the air under the sensor position with sump of the back function with the manifold air pressure. When the bleed valve with the bypass of the greater flow of the oil through the air is admitted through the orifice pack, the sensor position must move downwards, conversely reducing the bypass oil flow with less than admitted calories for the sensor piston to the rise. When the inlet flow and the outlet flow of the oil are equal, the piston remains stationary. Our 12.9 shows your air pressure sensory schematic. Starting at the bottom, you have the governor pilot valve plunger, then the maximum minimum fuel power piston to the this goes down from the governor pilot valve plunger goes the shutdown rod, shutting bushing fuel limiter, fuel limit nut, the load springs, and then from there you have the hydraulic amplifier, piston pilot valve plunger, sump, anti-siphoning check valve, orifice adjusting speed, bleed pin, evacuated bellows, sump of the pressure sensor, airbox pressure sensing valve, output eccentric adjustment, bleed valve diagram, restoring spring, sensor piston, fuel limit cam, fuel limit adjusting bell crank fowler, fuel limit floating lever. The sensing element consists of 2 opposed flexible metallic bellows. The bellow was evacuated with the lower bellow with the sensor for the air pressure for the RP pressure for the space for the joint bellow with the centric, while the outer end of each of the bellows restrained the prevent movement. The air pressure for the acting internal with the sensing bellows to produce the force causing the space for the move toward the evacuated bellows. The evacuated bellows provide the absolute reference, therefore sensing bellows force directly in proportional with the absolute air box pressure. Movement of the bellow spacer is transmitted to the outer strap of the bleed valve with the pin to the bleed valve diaphragm. The governor speed setting of the advantage for the governor power piston move with upward to completely additional fuel since the airbox pressure with the lag with the engine acceleration. Fuel limiter cam bell crank initially remain with the stationary until the airbox the pressure of the rise of the as the governor power piston moves downward, increase the fuel and limiting the flow of the floating lever with the depressed with the right end, the feedback lever, the hydraulic amplifier pushing the amplifier pilot valve with the plunger below the center, applying the pit pressure oil to the flow into the area around the amplifier, causing the piston to rise. The piston rises its lifts its fuel limiting lever, the fuel limit lever that contained with the fuel limit on the shutdown bushing, and it begins the lifting shutdown to the center of the governor pilot valve plunger. The upper movements of the fuel limiting feed lever continue left end of the feed lever, the lever raised with the far enough to main center of the amplifier pilot valve plunger. Stop the flow to the oil amplifier piston. At this point, the fuel limited lever recenter for the governor pilot valve plunger. Stopping the upward movement of the governor power piston. Although the governor flies are in under speed with the condition at the time, the power piston remains stationary until the airbox pressure rises. An engine speed or load increase of the airbox pressure begins with the rise over the short time lag. The increase of the airbox pressure produces the increase of the sensing bellow force. The bellow force causes the bleed valve of the diaphragm to move further off the seat. They allow for the greater flow of the oil to the sump. This then diminished through the orifice pack. The governor oil pressure acting on the upper side with the sensor piston force of the piston downward further compressed with the restoring spring. Piston continues the downward movement until the net increase of the restoring spring with the force is equal to the bellow force of the restore. The bellow and bleed valve of the diaphragm original position. At this point, the outflow oil is again equal to the inflow movement of the piston is halted. As the center piston cam move downward in the response with the rise of the airbox pressure, the bell crank will rotate with the clockwise direction. This allows the floating lever of the pilot to pivot the point with the left end of the lever to determine the hydraulic amplifier pilot valve plunger to rise. The pilot valve plunger rises above the center, under the amplifier piston, leave the sump through the drilled passage of the center and plunger. The passenger's plunger restricts the rate of the oil flow with the sump of the decrease of the rate of the movement of the amplifier piston with the minimize the hunting. The amplifier piston moves downward, the left end of the fuel limit. The lever also moves downward, the lower shutdown the rod, which turns the lower to the governor pilot valve plunger, increase the engine fuel. Sequence of events described above occurs in the continuous rapid sequence, the normal, the governor operation overriding during the acceleration transit with the engine fuel, the schedule and the function airbox pressure, regardless for the governor speed setting. During the steady state operation, the airbox pressure is normally greater than that at which the fuel limiting occurs. The sensor piston in the cam will be positioned below the effective limiting point. Maintenance, operating with the governor dial speed, connecting the airline to the air pressure to limiting the fitting of the governor, adjusting the air pressure to 36 HB ABS. If the test stand is equipped with the absolute pressure for the manometer with the reach of the inch of the mercury, the absolute directly with the manometer, the test stand is equipped with a mercury column and a barometer, the subtract of the barometric pressure from the absolute pressure given from the instrument action, they establish the pressure difference for the inch of the mercury of the mercury column. Loosen the eccentric locking screw. Figure 12.8 with the turning the sensor clockwise, sensor position travel over the top of the stroke. Measure the record the height of the fuel limiter in figure 12.10 with a convenient reference surface. Our figure 12.10 shows the fuel limit adjuster, starting from the fuel limiting adjusting screws, fuel limiting nut, the fuel limiting locking nut, fuel limiting lever, fuel limiting cam, bell crank, and the fuel limiting floating lever. The tightening the eccentric locking screws slightly turn the eccentric clockwise until the fuel limiting cam travels downward at 3/32 of an inch to 1/64. Tighten the locking screw rapidly. Decrease the air pressure from the end over to the bellows. It must be done in the application of the bending of the valve between the mercury and the columns. Governor air connection. Observe the limiter cam motion that should flow with the pressure with the changes closely. The limiter cam does not follow the decreasing of the air pressure. To check with the limiter oil supply filter or if the stack of the plunger for plunging. Adjust the air pressure for the 36 HBS. Check with the fuel limiting cam position on step 5. Fuel limiter description. Purpose of the fuel limiter to prevent supplying with the fuel to the engine, access with which can be properly consumed with the available airspeed with the air supply. In response to demand of fuel, the governor pilot is lowered to determine the governing oil to rate of the power piston. The power piston up being raised will be also lift the fuel limiting the floating lever. Figure 12.10. If the sufficient air is not available for the proper consumption, the hydraulic amplifier piston can contact the fuel lifter limit lever with the raise for the shutting down of the bushing governor piston valve with the governor oil through the power piston will be closed, then close the upper and increase the fuel movement to the power piston will be stopped. Since the limiter floating lever that has been moved to the fulcrum position automatically vary with the correct corresponding to the airbox pressure. This will adjust the limiter action and proportion available to the airbox pressure. Maintenance. When the governor operating with full speed establishes an absolute pressure, the sensor assembly bellows specified in table C1 of the strip of the data for the end of the section. Adjust the test standards available to air valve value linkage of the position of the power piston and the rack length with the specified in table C1. Loosen and back off the fuel limiting locking nut and the fuel limit nut at the top of the shutdown bushing threads. Adjust the fuel limiting adjusting screw until the fuel limit lever is in horizontal position determined visually. 5. Adjust the fuel limit nut until it just contacts the fuel limiting lever. Tighten the fuel limit locking nut. 7. Back off fuel limiting adjusting screw until the fuel limit lever contact with the fuel limit nut. 8. Adjust the fuel limiting adjusting screw until the fuel lever contacts with the limiting nut and limiter reduce the speed of 10 to 15 RPM. Slowly adjust the air valve linkage to reduce the governor speed to 100 RPMs. To observe the terminal shaft scale rank length of between the specific value of the table C1 of 0 hundredths to negative 0.02 of an inch. If the rack is not within specified tolerance, inspect the fuel limiting amplifier piston leakage. Reduce the absolute pressure to 42 HGs. Adjust the test standard of the air valve linkage until the governor speed of the PAME. Very slowly adjust the speed of the air valve linkage to the decrease the rack length of the 10 to 15 RPM speed reduction occurs. 14. Injector rack length must be specified in table C2. If the rack is not specified, loosen the fuel limited cam with the locking spring with the figure 12A with the slightly until the top of the cam toward the bell crank to increase the rack length and away from the bell crank to decrease the rack length with the tighten the locking screw. Repeat the steps 12 and 13. 15. Repeat steps 1 through 14 until all conditions of the table C1 and C2 are met. Setting rebalancing rocking arm stopper screw. The rebalancing rocker arm figure 1211 adjust the load available to combustion with the setting of the balance rocker arm with stop screw. Determine the balance adjusting injector rack position with the minimum airbox pressure required for full load airbox pressure below the required full load of the rebalancer rocker to air position pilot valve to limit the load of the proportion of available air pressure. Figure 1211 shows the rebalancing of the stopping screw adjustment of the feeler gauge, the rebalancing of the rocker arm block, and the stop screw. It is recommended that the governor be placed on a suitable test and perform the following maintenance. Loosen the lock nut, screw down with the rebalancer rocker arm stop screw with the figure 1211 and ensure no interference during the load of the governor on the test stand. Operate the governor injector rack length with the engine speed pressure that's shown on the table to B3 using 1,000 to 2,000 of an inch feeler gauge on the rebalancing rocker arm of the block of the figure 1211. Run the screw up until the drag of the valve and the gauge is placed is pulled from under the block. Tighten the lock nut forward with the check with the above setting with reducing absolute pressure for the sensor assembly below 5 inches to 6 inches HG with a re-establishing pressure to table to B with a step as in this step. Again, 1,000 to 2,000 feeler gauge under the rebalancer rocker arm block. Check to see that the same drag is felt along the gauge step 3. Alright, your load regulator pilot valve with the associated linkage description. The load regulator pilot valve figure 1212 with the device for the governor controlling the oil valve lane motor of the load regulator. In addition with this load, the load control is dependent upon the absolute air pressure for the if the rebalancer will vary the position of the load control pilot valve within respond with the variation engine airbox barometric pressure. Pilot valve linkage to the figure 1212 consists of the rebalancing rocker arm horizontal floating links loaded with the linkage eccentrically with the later being threaded into the pilot valve plunger. Pilot valve conjunction with the load regulator regulates the engine. Assume with the predetermined load for the engine throttle position and control of the loading of the main generator through the battery field. The action rebalancing linkage is set for the lower of the predetermined load valve established with the airbox pressure valve of the load of the minimum that has been established for full load operation. Figure 1212 showed the partial governor section through the pilot valve associated part of when the engine outside output with the correct with the center of the throttle position lands with the pilot valve plunger closed with the ports B and C in the pilot valve bushing. In the plunger position, no oil can be flowed through the ports on to and from the load regulator vane motor. Position is balanced in position with the pilot valve is shown lubricating oil under the pressure entry of the valve and into point between the lands on the over the plunger is trapped in the pilot valve and is balanced when the horsepower demands on the engine is greater or less for the engine is adjusting to develop at the given throttle position. A change will be made with the position with the governor power position made with the change with the horsepower demand. Since the throttle position has not been changed, the pilot valve plunger will either be raised or lowered through the movement of the power piston linkage of the action. Unbalanced the pilot valve with the oil permitted the flow cause the load regulator to adjust the generator load to the designed engine output. Alright, figure Figure 12, 12 load regulator pilot valve schematic diagram. 1 rebalancing rocker arm, 2 overriding solenoid, 3 the floating link, 4 slotted link, 5 the eccentric and clevis, 6 the power piston tail rod, 7 the pilot valve scales, 8 the overriding piston, 9 the power piston stop screw, 10 the power piston, 11 pilot valve bushing, 12 pilot valve plunger, 13 overriding valve, and 14 speed settings piston extension. If more than a proper load is placed on the engine of the piston, will move upward and increase the fuel with the action rate of the piston valve plunger. Figure 1212, opening the port B with the upper land, the oil pressure that can then flow from port B with the vane motor of the lead regulator. This covers the load regulator movement to reduce the main generator output. The volume rotates and then pushes oil ahead of the oil line port C with this pilot valve. Then to the engine oil sump that is low to the engine, reduce the power piston of the pilot valve plunger, move it down with the normal position. The pilot valve plunger again with the close for the port B and C. Operation pilot valve with the less proper load engine the opposite, but given the overload, adjusting the generator load to permit the engine to assume the proper load with the center throttle position. The rate of the movement of the vane and brush holder with the load regulator automatically controlled with the orifice in slot C, port C and lower port over the pilot valve bushing, and the oil from the load regulator must return through port C when the oil's load regulator leaves for the port B. When the oil regulator passes through port C, the slot orifice of the pilot valve bushing lower part of the design provided with the definite rate of the load regulator movement. Normal action load regulator pilot valves is previously described and nullified, overridden with the energized overriding solenoid. The action arrived at the pilot valve above the normal range of the over travel is determined by the mechanical linkage caused from the load of the regulator toward the minimum field position. When the solenoid de-energized the pilot valve with the load regulator position is again determined with the mechanical linkage C, the overriding solenoid. Maintenance is recommended with the governor place on the suitable test to perform the following maintenance: setting pilot valve linkage preparation, and before setting the pilot valve speed with the air pressure sensor, some of the rebalance of the rocker arm stop screw with the must be correctly so the previously outlined. Ensure the terminal shaft scale but can travel at 1.96 inch or 62 hundredths of an inch. It is not loose from rack. Stop with the screw lock nut and adjust the rack stop screw until the full range of the train travel is attained. Or setting procedure. Operate the governor on the test stand with the full load length, engine speed, pressure from the sensor assembly at 1 inch, 2 inch of the barometric above the shown with the table B with the servo data end of the section. Power test stand with the servo indicator should be balanced at some point with well above, away from either at the end of the travel setting given in step 1. If not, loose from the eccentric lever with the lockering screw with the figure 12-3 with the use of the screwdriver adjusting the eccentric to bring pilot valve to the balancing position. Tighten the clevis locking screw. Point over the pilot valve scale within 0 with the pilot valve balance for the necessary relocate with the scale with the position with the pointer at 0. Or operate the governor testing stand and simulate with the engine idle speed with the terminate shaft point with the end pressure of the sensor assembly error shown in figure table B. 4. Pilot valve with the scale pointer should be in the maximum field start position. If the pointer is below the maximum field position, remove the setting locking pin figure 12-13. Turn the floating link adjusting screw length with dimension A, and if above the dimension A should be shortened, one with the correction adjusting dimension A 1.5 required within the return for the condition step 0 and balance outline in step 1. Figure 12-13 show the pilot valve linkage, rebalancing rocker arm, floating adjusting screw settings lock pin, clevis locking screw floating link, and the overriding solenoid and eccentric adjustment. Recheck the settings of information conform with the condition given in step 1, 2, 3, and 4. Obtain with the correct adjustment. Full speed condition with the idle speed condition. Readjust the linkage outline with the under until the correction position obtained. 16. Install the new setting locking pin. And once the pilot valve is properly set, it should not be changed with the correct engine output until all the other conditions investigated. Overriding solenoid description. The governor solenoid solenoid O with the figure 12-12 is deployed with the governor override normal action pilot valve linkage move with the load regulator with the direction of the minimum field of the solenoid energized with the eccentric circuits, which may be determined with the constant and specific wire diagram covering the particular governing application, while the overriding solenoid energizes the move of the small cylindrical valve with the downward permitting the governor or accumulator oil pressure flow under the overriding cylinder piston. Piston moves up the carrying the load regulator pilot valve plunger with it in the solenoid is de-energized. Spring move the pilot valve back to the normal position. Main solid adjustment with the governor operating at the idle speed. Loosing the lock nut overriding solenoid. Run with the screw down until the load control pilot valve moves up. Carefully back off the screw and run until the pilot valve starts down. Then back off the screw in the full quarter turn of the O and lock it. Improper adjustment over the overriding solenoid results in the loss of the regulator accumulator oil pressure for this cover the overriding of the solenoid. Adjusting the screw with the backed off too far with the valve, allowing the valve to open supply support, permitting the governor oil pressure to be bypassed directly back to the governor oil sump. In case where the engine dies in lower throttle position, the adjusting of the override solenoid should be one of the checks made. The oil pressure shutdown. The oil pressure shutdown device in figure 1214 is an integral part of the governor of the device will respond to the shutting of the engine down while the low oil conditions created caused by any of the following: a true system of the low oil pressure, positive crankcase pressure, low water supply, where through the low water and the crankcase pressure detector will relieve the pressure from the oil pressure line to the governor. Overheated lube oil will also relieve the oil pressure with the line to the governor through the hot oil detector. A time delay approximately 50 to 60 seconds. Idle engine speed with the provided with the alarm switch with the tray for the engine shuts down. They allow the operators pressures to reach for the starting engine to provide the time to locate the trouble spot of the event with a malfunction. Repeated engine starting to locate the cover of the shutdown not to be attempted. The time delay of the void the third throttle of the shutdown will occur with approximately 2 seconds. So the oil pressure in the lowest area in the rear of the engine with the oil line runs through the point of the shutdown device of the governor shutting device. In the governor in figure 1214 consists of the oil failure of the diaphragm plunger time, the delay of the accumulator oil failure position, ball valve, and shutdown rod and alarm switch. The engine pressure of the oil is emitted to the left of the oil failure diaphragm. The spring of the eccentric pressure with the left side of the diaphragm pressure oil through the governor speed with the setting of the position piston push with against with the right over the side of the oil failure diagram. The pressure of the oil span with the setting of the piston varies with the engine speed side. The highest pressure for the full engine speed with the lowest idle engine speed. If the engine oil pressure reduced below the safe valve with the speed setting with the pressure, oil pressure will become greater with the engine oil pressure. The move of the oil failure of the diaphragm plunger to the left of the permits the governor oil pressure to move the shutdown plunger at the right, releasing the trapped oil above the speed setting the piston, allowing piston to travel upward when the piston extension contacts lifted the shutdown bushing of the governor pilot valve with the shutdown rod. Result in movement of the other governor component for the plate for the terminal shaft, the injector control lever, and the injector rack for no fuel position. Engine will shut down. Or when the shutdown plunger moves out of the alarm switch with the actuator with the color band and the visible the plunger indicating that the device has been tripped. After being tripped, the plunger must be manually reset with the permit the plunger to control the engine operation. With the condition of the warm of the engine may be shut down, the action will occur through the plunger where being held manually. When the oil failure piston move to the right, the contact of the valve pin unseat the ball valve release for the speed of the setting of the piston over the oil pressure through the ball valve. The time delay feature with the device controlled by the engine speed. When the engine speed is below the fourth throttle position, the governor pressure oil must be passed for the time to delay the device by reaching the oil. Alright, this shows figure 1214. Let's back out. Alright, 1214 shows the oil pressure. You should first the first colored engine oil pressure, half colored trapped oil under pressure. Governor sump oil, full part, governor oil pressure, intermittent governor oil pressure, engine oil pressure, inlet time delay, accumulator, oil failure, diaphragm, speed setting, oil pressure, alarm switch, shutting down, piston screw, speed setting screw, from the settings, speed setting oil, alarm switch, shutdown plunger, accumulator piston, oil failure, piston time delay, actuator, engine oil pressure inlet, bypass adjusting screw, triangular fulcrum plate, time delay bypass to the sump, and governor oil pressure time delay adjustment requesting port and speed control rotating pump bushing. Failure position. The time delay is brought with Time delay is brought about with the governor oil pressure and the passing the intermittent flow orifice toward the top of the speed creating of the rotating bushing at each for the revolution of the bushing. A slow bushing aligned with the oil failure piston with the amount of the oil discharge through the slot. The regulator with the adjusting port sleeve with the amount of the oil discharge to determine the time related to the emitted sufficient oil of the movement of the accumulator piston through the full travel of the operating with the oil failure with when the engine speed is above 3/3 throttle piston with the speed solenoid bearing on the triangular fulcrum plate with the governor opens for the time delay pipe after the bypass is open. The governor oil go directly the oil failure piston. The shutdown will occur within 2 seconds. Or maintenance. Setting up time delay bypass. 1. Operate the governor at throttle 2 position with a normal oil pressure governor. 2. Back off the shovel turn with the bypassing adjusting screw figure 1214 located in the triangular plate with between A and C and D. A and C and D. Solenoids. Open the lube oil pressure relief valve with the close the lube oil pressure supply valve with the drop oil pressure to the valve 0 rapidly as possible. Shut down the plunger. Shut down. Should not trip it unless for less than 30 seconds. Turn the bypass adjusting screw slightly. Repeat the steps 1 and 3 until the shutdown plunger and trips on 2 seconds less than after the oil pressure is rapidly drop to 0. Back out of the bypass adjusting screw 1/4 to 3/8 of inch of the 3/8 of a turn. Repeat the step 3 and low idle and idle throttle 2 position shutdown not to occur in less than 30 seconds. Repeat step 3 in the throttle 4 position shutdown must not occur within 2 seconds. Shutdown must occur within 2 seconds. Setting time delay. Operate with the governor at idle speed. Open the lube oil pressure relief valve with the lube oil pressure supply valve. Drop the oil pressure with 0 as rapidly as possible. This could cover the shutting down with the plunger trip of 50 to 60 seconds. The time delay is not within 50 to 60 seconds limit. Adjust the time delay. Adjustment figure 12.4 with the locomotive located under AC solenoids move with the adjustment with the counterclockwise direction. Increase the time delay. Alright, your oil filter. The oil filter in true figure 1215 is used with the governor to protect the servo valves with the assembly screen with the door for the stack with the filter contained with the housing of the mounting on the side plate. The main for the design filter is under the normal service is expected to stay in service without cleaning of the other intention maintenance may be done. The annual inspection with the other governor work, however, if the central assembly of bellows operation does not follow air pressure change. Figure 1215 shows the oil filter removed. Close lead. Check the filter. Be checked for the cleanliness. If the required, the filter must be cleaned with the washing of the solvent, the flusher of the flushing the governor. Governor is not recommended the regular maintenance except the governor should be disassembled clean for the operation paired to do with the dirt and other foreign material particles of the governor in case of the necessity for the governor is suspected of being dirty. It would not be practical to remove the governor from the engine. It may be flushed for the engine flow. If the engine should be shut down with the drain with the plug, remove the governor in case of the patio petcock, open with a closed valve with a replay for the plug with a 2-point for the filter kerosene with the governor with the starting of the engine, using the injector control lever very speed with the engine with 400 to 500 RPMs for about 5 minutes, shutting with the engine down with the drain the kerosene from the governor, and repeat the operation several times for the use until the kerosene drain from the governor appears clean. Add the 2 points recommended oil pressure governor. Repeat the above the procedure, and then drain this will remove the kerosene trapped at the governor. Fill the governor with the recommended oil with the proper level to start the engine. Adjust for the governor compensation previously described. The oil level should then be checked and the oil added if necessary. Governor oil supply. When the engine idle speed with the governor oil should be maintained proper level of the sight glass with the vent with the top of the sight glass must be opened to ensure the correct reading of the governor oil specification lifted and serve with the data page. The governor storage. When the governor is to be stored with the governor oils may be drained when the governor has been operated with the oil to meet the specification. No further treatment is necessary for the governor oil. Does not meet the recommended specifications. Drain and fill. Recommended oil. If possible, operate the governor with a several minutes, then drain the oil. It is recommended that you should be used with the governor in the return servo. The governor drive assembly description. The governor drive assembly figure 1216 with the mount with the front of the engine accessory drive cover with the adjacent with the water pump. The governor is mounted with the housing driving through the 90-degree bevel drive gear drive. The seated end with the drive shaft with the mated with the drive plate with the governor drive gear with the accessory with the gear train. Lubrication with the governing drive gear bearings is provided with the drive drill passage for the driving housing. A cover having the removable plug is provided with the housing with the tachometer adapted figure 1216 that can be inserted with the drive shaft end with the adapter end with the insert with the reamed hole with the end with the governor and drive shaft with everything as a friction fit. Mainly for the governor drive assembly normally does not require servicing except for the time of the general engine. Overall recondition is the time when the condition warm of the governor drive assembly should be removed within parts inspected. Check with after the removal of the governor drive assembly can be used easily remove the mounting of the dowel correct position governor driving housing accessory drive cover. Figure 1216 show the drive cover. Application show the tachometer with the governor drive shaft, the governor's gears of the shaft, the drive shaft, bearing cover, drive gear plug, driven gear, oil passage covering, mounting studs, the accessory driver cover, the governor driving gear. After the governor drive assembly has been removed, it is assembled visually inspect the bushings of the board with the thrust face over the flaking embedded dirt, chipping and scoring with the bushing with the tip of the flak with a large quantity of the embedded dirt should be replaced with a new bushing. Check for the oil passage for the housing to be ensured free of the restriction. Inspect the bevel gear for the neck for the pitting of the visible wear of the loaded on the tooth face for the neck of the burrs in the high spot, but it should be stone with the gear with replaced. If necessary to replace the gear, recommended that both gears are replaced. Check the individual parts of the assembly to be sure that they are within limits of serve the data. Alright, service data and the governor. Table A. Table A show your speed settings. Table B show the pilot valve. Table C show the fuel limiter, and Table C2. Then you have your minimum and maximum limits. Bush and bear, bush boring diameter, maximum distance between the bushing thrust minimum, diameter drive shaft minimum, governor drive shaft thrust face minimum, maximum driven gear thrust face maximum, diameter driven shaft journal minimum, bevel gear backlash maximum thrust clearance, and your equivalent list: the hand tachometer, mechanical controller adapter, tacho drive adapter, rotary shaft bearing, removable installer, rotary shaft oil seal driving rod, rotor shaft oil seal remover, and speed controller, solenoid adjusting wrench, governor adapter, and hand tachometer. Material specification: general or governor oil. That completes the section 12 on the governor.